A gentleman in Moscow follows a Russian count as he loses his power and his influence and position within a society that is rapidly changing. Set during the Bolshevik Revolution, and just after, following all the way to Stalin's reign of terror and till he himself passes away. It follows a changing Russia, society, and world coming into a new era within the 20th century, and as one man faces the changes within his life, and as he raises his own daughter with this new society, and how inevitably he flees from the country. Alexander Ilyich Rostov is a count who was free of the revolution. He was safely hidden away in Paris, yet chose to return to the Soviet Union at that time when the revolution and civil war between the red and the whites was currently going on. Many did not understand why he would ever do such a thing, especially because of his position, being someone who would most likely be killed. He chose to do so because his sister, who he felt responsible, not for her death, but be responsible not being there when she died, because he shot a man through the shoulder who he had forgiven his gambling debts, and the man felt an annoyance toward Ilyich and thus tried to ruin his sister, and inevitably led to Alexander having shot him when he fled their house. A gentleman in Moscow generally follows only within the hotel and has a very confined setting, and thus it follows mainly the internal being of Alexander and how he works around within the ever-expanding hotel, somehow always managing to grow and develop new plot lines, characters, while surviving in such a minimalistic setting. Right. So, I have no one else to discuss or interview with the Gentleman in Moscow book, but I have plenty of notes within it, and I have the setting. So, if you notice, the setting of which we had selected before was outside, and now I've moved to the indoors into my attic, which the Gentleman of Moscow, in Moscow, the setting with where the book is set plays a major role in the theme and of the characters and their actions themselves. When in the hotel, when the count or when parts of the story is set within the Boyarsky or in the main entrance of the hotel or in the bar, more often than not, this causes it to have a more open, a more vibrant feel, more electric. But when it's set in his hotel room or in the hallways, the service stairs, it's more confined, it's more contracted, and that plays into the element of one of the themes that is consistently shown throughout the book, which is one's life is determined by what they do with what they have, not by what, but one's life is determined with what they do with what they have been given, which you could put that theme onto multiple characters, but especially the Count, where he is an aristocrat, but no longer holds any titles. He's wealthy, but has no money, in a sense. All that he has is the money that he stowed away in his desk, which he, at the end of the book, uses to flee from the Soviet Russia. But his, I would say, pseudo-daughter, or in reality, it is his daughter by the end of the book, Sophia, how at one point she even doesn't want to leave the hotel because of the life that the hotel attendees have made for her within, and this life she enjoys more than what she feels she would get from the outside, but he convinces her to leave that. Another part is, well, as just discussed, Rostov is like her father to Sophia, and it's a father is who raises the child, not who gives birth. That is a common theme, but Sophia's father, he was sent to the re-education gulags in Siberia. This element is important because Anna, who is Sophia's mother, she married, well, Sophia's father, who I don't believe, they do say his name, but he is a minor character, and he is sent to Siberia in re-education. This is after they were sent to the Ukraine to help with the collectivization of the grain and the agriculture. That's what caused the Holodomor, that where over 1 million Ukrainians and Khazars, they starved to death essentially due to Soviet or the Bolsheviks trying to collectivize agriculture as they did with industry. But essentially, Rostov steps up. He only at first believed he would be her father figure for about a month or two, but then it became the rest when Anna just never returned. Another major theme is the true cost of revolution is often not felt long after it brings about abrupt change, because in reality, the defeat of the rise of the Soviets, Bolsheviks, as in the book they go from Bolsheviks to the Soviets, but it's only really was felt in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union, but even now it's still being felt with like Putin and Russia trying to retake Georgia, or especially Ukraine right now, where it is territory they see as sovereign to theirs because they held it before the fall of the Soviet socialist republics. But a major influence also is it kind of plays into the idea of religion within the book, which the Soviets or communist dictatorships generally very heavily try to destroy and get rid of. And there's one story of a priest being thrown out of a bell tower when the Soviets were taking the bells for iron, or just people waiting in a bread line within the city, and when they're waiting for bread, the reason they wait in one line rather than another is they claim that it's shorter, but in reality it's just because they want to pray to a mural. And there's just small little things, such as when Sophia falls and bangs her head, Rostov, he chooses to pray, and he even says himself, it's the first time he's prayed in a very long time. So religion is an element within the book, but it's a element that is heavily pushed against, but at the same time it's invited. So there's still euphemisms towards it, but it's just not very invited. And then the last one is you must resolve your problems your way, not by how others want you to. This is an important part because of when the reason Rostov leaves Russia is because he shot a dragoon, a hussar. He shot a man who is another nobility. He shot him through the shoulder, did not kill him, but his family sent him away to Paris. He returns because his sister Helena died, but he did also return for his grandmother, but he felt that he was not going to, I would say, flee from problems anymore. He would not miss out, such as he missed out on his sister dying, where it's not that he blames himself for her death, but he blames himself for not being there. And so that's a thing where even an American commented when he was talking to him in the bar that such an occurrence he didn't understand how the Count was justifying that to himself to return, but he did. But elements within his setting, which is just, as already discussed, and just the overwhelming, I wouldn't say dread, but it's the overwhelming element that the Soviets have control, and how it's just the transitioning of a society. And the remaining is, it stays first person for most of it, which would be the point of view. That would be the element, but it does transition sometimes to other characters just to get quick understanding of what element, like what details it needs to explain. But it's generally just Alexander Ilyich Rostov, and then characters who help his view or help explain what he's doing or why he's doing it. And one of the other major one is flashbacks or foreshadowing, which would be discussing things in the future, because there's random statements of suicide that you would expect someone who is trapped in the hotel to maybe go towards, but he never does, which is a very good element because he's strong enough to resist. And then flashbacks, which is such as when he explains with the Helena situation. Some of the questions that I don't want to copy exactly off of the document that we were provided, but I will kind of use in a sense, would be, who are the most powerful people in the text? The book is very interesting because it makes you sympathize with the aristocrats, the people who generally in stories such as Robin Hood or other ones that we've read, you wouldn't really sympathize with the king or the counts, the ones who are rich without having earned it. And in reality, generally, the poor man would have been the Bolsheviks, the revolutionaries, the ones who came from nothing and became very rich. But you see how it's an essence of absolute power corrupts people, which that's a very important element, where a lot of it is discussing the hierarchy of a society once there's no hierarchy anymore, because it's no longer someone's money that determines who's in power, and it's no longer someone's God or birth-given right. It is now someone's arbitrary or bureaucratic reasoning for why they are higher in the hierarchy of the society. And then, why do they have power? It's just they were the ones who were in the right place at the right time, such as Stalin himself, where they say his name is So-So, but he's just someone who was the hiring guy, and somehow he made it to the top. Well, not somehow, but he managed to make it to the top. And the culture as a whole, it does discuss Russian literature somewhat, but it also discusses the Russian culture, where much of what you read in history or much of what you read around Russia is always considered as the backwater of Europe, oftentimes not even considered European, especially in the era this book is set. Whether Russians were even considered white or European as a whole definitely comes into question, especially with such as the Germans' ideology of Hitler and all that. But Rostov does compete with that himself, which is, are they a civilized people based off what they did? Can you consider your culture to be a civilized one if your people would be so destructive and so undermining of their fundamentals? And I would say another major element is, I wouldn't say it's criticizing the Soviets. I just wouldn't say it's praising them. It's not praising them as liberators or revolutionaries. It's just portraying them in a sense, because during Stalin's purges and after the revolution, millions died, but it never directly discusses. And so in the book, you could genuinely say, oh, someone could just live in the Soviet Union. It wasn't just a terror of everyone's dying every minute, but it's not portraying it in a way of the aristocrats were these oppressors who were who were of a begotten era. It portrays them more as a people who were just like parents passing away. It's just a people who no longer exist, as such as like the dodo bird. They went with the wind. Or as the Native Americans, where you can see their culture and you can see their elements still existing within society, and people still know of them and they still discuss of them, but they just do not hold any major influences anymore. And in some cases, not anymore, but in the past, they were actively fought against having cultural and passing such claims to the children. Such as one point when Rostov says to his Sophia, with Anna, she was a child when the revolution was so young, so when he said, would you want to be a princess, she was still, oh yes, very interested. But Sophia, though, cited a line which was basically aristocracy is something of the past and not of the present. I would say, with the last question, how does the word consider traditionally marginalized populations? I would say the poor are a traditionally marginalized population, especially the serfs in Russia, set during the early 20th century, for how they were starving and all that. And I would say it portrays them in a very interesting way, of that people can inevitably be very violent and very vindictive human beings when given power. And especially those who were powerless, once they're given power, they might abuse it, especially those who feel they are even disadvantaged with power. Because Alexander is a man who is 6'3". He's conventionally what you would consider an attractive man. And at one point there is a Soviet bureaucrat who is shorter, fat, and he would be considered not as socially, physically capable. And thus, even though power-wise they've been flipped in this society, the short, fat man still holds a discontent for Alexander, because Alexander is someone from the past who held this societal power and political, but still, even without any of that, he still is above this man who wants that natural power. In general, I think Gentleman Moscow does a really good job of flipping the roles of how you would view a rich versus poor aristocracy, and it makes you, I would say honestly, it makes you sympathize with the aristocracy, even during the Russian Revolution, a period where if you wouldn't really want to sympathize with people, because they didn't care for the serfs, and the serfs were basically slaves. And so it's more of it doesn't discuss their problems, because obviously it comes from the first person view of Alexander Rostov, who was one of their ranks, but it really makes you consider the changes that happen in society, and we can use this knowledge within our own political landscape of today. But in the US, it's unique because we don't really have inheritable ranks and royalty. We do have it with money, but that's in no way the same. But in general, I would say it's a very good book. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how much?